All right. I think we are at almost 9 o'clock, and I'm actually going to introduce somebody other than the speaker. I'm going to introduce to you our very own professor, Alejandro Martin Gomez. And so he's going to do the spiel that I do about the institute. He'll try. And so I think this will be our new model. We'll try to keep going, is to say there's a new introducer, so that you all know them, but hopefully there is new audience that comes in every time, and there's new people on Zoom, and they will see some other faces besides mine in their computer screen. So Dr. Alejandro Martin Gomez, who is an assistant professor with us and also with electrical and computer sciences, and he will tell you why he's connected with this talk, and he will introduce the speaker. All right.
All right, so good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the introduction. So I'm really thrilled to welcome everyone to this new session of our speaker series. And as it is common for us, before I introduce the speaker, I want to talk a little bit about IQR, right? So we are an institute that is driven by purpose, and our mission is to pioneer solutions to wicked problems through convergence research. So our objective is we try to bring together academic, industry, government, and nonprofit sectors to make a positive societal. So we're trying to do that by creating and deploying innovations at scale. And our vision is to be recognized as a leader in research convergence for societal impact, and the preeminent partner in creating and deploying comprehensive, transformative, and scalable innovations that stimulate economic growth and improve health and well-being in Arkansas. So there are 5 words that define what we are, who we are, and these include integrative, convergence, economic development at scale, and societally. So with this brief introduction, I think we're getting ready to introduce our speaker. I'm certainly delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Dr. Peter Kazanzides. So he's coming from Johns Hopkins University, and he's today's featured speaker. And when we were thinking about who should we invite, and just based on the small spiel that I gave a few seconds ago, I immediately thought about, I think Dr. Kazanzides is a great example of how research can make a societal impact, how research can really change the life of people. So Dr. Kazanzides began work on surgical robotics in March 1989. So he was a postdoctoral research with Professor Russell Taylor, which now leads the Laboratory for Computational Sciences and Robotics at Hopkins. And he co-founded Integrated Surgical Systems in 1990. So as director of robotics and software at this company, he was responsible for the design, implementation, validation, and support of the Robotic. The Robotic is a system that has been used for more than 20,000 hip and knee replacement surgeries. So this is a robot that was actually used in clinical practice. So Dr. Kazanzides has been at Hopkins since 2002 and currently holds an appointment as a research professor of computer science. His research focuses on computer integrated surgery, space robotics, and its reality. His lab also developed and continues to support the Vinci Research Kit, which is the most widely used medical robotics research platform. So the Vinci Research Kit is the topic of today's talk, and I can't wait to hear what Dr. Kazanzides has to share with us.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the nice introduction, Alejandro. Thank you also for the invitation to come here. It's a very impressive institute. So I look forward to seeing a lot of great work coming out of here as well. Yes, today's talk will focus on the Vinci Research Kit. I'll describe a bit what that is, and then talk about some of the research that it's enabled, at least in my lab. Research a lot of other places as well. I guess this button will go forward.
Yeah.
This one. It didn't. All right. All right. So the next slide, when we get to it, will be just sort of a quick overview of what you just heard about my background that I had. So I don't need to reread all of that stuff, but basically I use this excuse to show a picture of what I looked like when I was young, like, I don't know, 36 years ago now. That picture was actually taken in the operating room of a veterinary clinic. It was a Robotic, which, as Alejandro mentioned, did orthopedic surgery. Turns out dogs actually need hip replacements too, due to hip dysplasia. And so our first patients were pets, people's pets that needed hip replacements. And yes, now I've been working at Hopkins. And so outline, again, I'll discuss the dVRK. And then I'll spend probably most of the time talking about the augmented reality work, some of those applications. And then, assuming there's time, I'll have a little bit to say about force estimation and bilateral teleoperation. Okay, so I'll explain a little bit what the Da Vinci is, just in case people don't know already. But the Da Vinci, it's a very successful commercial product by a company called Intuitive Surgical in California. It addresses minimally invasive surgery. So there are some surgical instruments. Oh, there's a laser pointer here, isn't there? Yes. So there's these instruments that are inserted into through small incisions into the patient, and then there's an endoscope. That's a stereo camera that provides stereo images that this person can look at, and they have some essentially fancy joysticks that allow them to move the little wristed instruments inside the patient and do these surgeries. It's essentially telepresence. You know, this person is shrinking their eyes and their hands down so they can go through these small holes and do procedures on the patient. So that's what the Da Vinci is. Now, if you want to do research with this type of system, what's available to a researcher? This company actually was nice and provided a read-only API, which allows you to get data from the robot, which is useful for things like skill assessment. If you want to look at, how efficiently a surgeon moved, you can collect the data and do that type of analysis. But there's a lot of stuff, like if you wanted to play around with autonomous surgery, you can't do that with this read-only API. There was another system called the Raven 2 developed at University of Washington for the research community, which would allow you to, at least it sort of replicated some of this functionality over here. But it's rather expensive to build something like that from scratch. So what we came up with was what's now known as the Da Vinci Research Kit. So the idea is that you get the mechanical parts from the older generation of these Da Vinci robots, and then you combine them with some open source. You replace the proprietary electronics with the open source electronics. You can see some of the controllers down here for the system. Again, this looks a little bit stripped down. This one maybe looks a little bit better. These are both systems in our lab. So this is the surgeon console where the surgeon would sit. You can't really see them here, but there's some of those fancy joysticks down here called MTMs or master tool manipulators. And then on the patient side robot, here's the instruments and the endoscope in the middle here. And this is something now that has been disseminated to the research community. You've got this map shows pins of where it's been. There's about 45 different sites, more than 50 robots, because several institutions, including Hopkins, have more than one system. Okay, so this has been around for a bit over 10 years now. I guess it was in 2012 when we first started making these available, because that's when the hardware became available, because the company had discontinued this first generation system, and so they were just donating it to researchers. Okay, so what's been the impact? This was a review paper that was done by a student at University College London, I believe, where she looked at all of the research that had been done over 10 years, the prior 10 years with the dVRK, and found that there were a total of 253 publications worldwide that were enabled by this shared research platform that people could use for this type of research. Another metric is you could look at, I guess, as of November, I look at Google Scholar, that original 2014 paper that described the system. Now has 664 citations. Now that's not 664 papers that use the dVRK. Some of them, of course, were just citing it as a system of interest. But I think our last count, we have close to 500 publications now that were enabled by the existence of this shared platform. Okay, so peek a little bit under the hood. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I love talking about this, but I don't think a lot of people like hearing about it. So, but system architecture, as I mentioned, there's electronics that has to be developed because the company's proprietary electronics was not provided. And so we adopted a distributed architecture where we have separate controller boards for each arm. And then we have a field bus, basically a high-speed network that connects all of them to a central PC. What we did, the reason I did it this way is that I found that at the university, at least back when we were starting this work, which actually dates back to the mid-2000s, students were not as familiar with embedded programming. I think nowadays with Arduino and other things like that, there's more familiarity. But we wanted them to we wanted to have a system where you could do all of the work on a standard like Linux PC using, the standard sort of GCC tool chain, so that students could more easily develop their software with the system. And then all we're doing over this field bus is I/O, essentially getting all the the commands out to the motors and getting the feedback back from all the sensors. And of course, in robotics, for those of you who do it, nowadays you have to have ROS, robot operating system interfaces at least at the higher level for encryption purposes. So this is what a typical system would look like with one of our controllers. We actually had originally developed 4-axis controllers, and we were using FPGAs because we were really trying to have this be very fast, so that whatever you did here, you could have very low latency in getting any commands sent over this high-speed network out to the hardware. And so this just shows a setup with a couple of different arms connecting, and it's a daisy chain. We actually originally used FireWire, more recently also support Ethernet. I'll mention there's now a newer generation of dVRK. The first controllers were intended for the first generation system, which was retired back around 2012. But there are actually 5 generations of Da Vinci's now. This is showing the first 3 because they're now available to the community because they're no longer used in hospitals. And so what the company tended to do is every time they went from one generation to the next, they only updated half of the system. So between the first and the second, they left the surgeon console the same, just put a little label on the side of it, but they completely changed this side, the patient side. And from the second to the third, they left the patient side the same, and they completely changed the surgeon side. So, so we've come up with a controller now that covers essentially all the systems shown here, but not this one, because of course, when they went from the 3rd to the 4th generation, which I haven't shown, they kept this the same and they updated this side. So this is still used clinically, so we can't have it as research units, at least not as an open research platform. Okay, so this is actually the next generation system was a bit more complicated because there was a lot of embedded electronics. The first generation had nothing inside. There was this big thick cable of wires that was direct connections to all the motors and encoders and sensors. Whereas here, a lot of that was digitized inside the arm. This is actually up here on the arm, actually back here. And so we ended up having to come up with an option where we would reprogram the firmware on these embedded boards so that we could reuse them. And that was one of my students, Jean Wu, was able to do that by doing a summer internship at the company, so she had access to the proprietary information she needed to do this alternative firmware. She's now an assistant professor at Vanderbilt. And Keshwai has also did a lot of electronics work on it. He just defended his PhD. It's now a postdoc. So now we have systems like this where we can have kind of this mix of different generations of hardware, both on the electronics and on the mechanical side, all working together in a single system. So that's just sort of in a very quick overview of what the dVRK is. So the key things are you get the mechanical hardware. Often the company will donate it. There's an application process for that. And then the electronics and software are open source. Obviously, electronics you can't just download and use. You have to actually have it built. So there's a little bit of cost there, but it's a pretty low cost way for researchers to have access to something that's very clinically realistic. Because until just a few years ago, these systems were all used in hospitals, and now they still are, but just newer generations. Okay. So that was just for the background of what the dVRK is. I can take questions at any time if people have them before moving on to the next section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you mix all these systems together in the research space?
Yeah.
So could you give some idea to us of how that any research you do here inform the next steps? Because now you've got all these mixed up systems for the clinical or whatever is going to go out is actually not used. Right.
So that's a good question. There are some things that we cannot easily do on a dVRK and then translate into clinical use. But a lot of the basic paradigms, this idea of teleoperating, using these master input devices, having this immersive visualization, the kinematic design of the instruments, that stuff's really all the same between the generations. And in fact, if you look at the endoscope video, I haven't shown an endoscope video yet, but later, that looks the same. Basically, the little wrists that go inside, so basically you see a shaft with a little tiny wrist at the end of it. That's the same. Day one, first generation to the current generation, those all look the same. So there's a lot of things that are the same. There are a few things that are not. You'll see later in my presentation, there's some computer vision stuff we're doing. That's, of course, very sensitive to exactly what the thing we're looking at looks like. Another sort of minor nuisance is surgeons, they got used to in the third generation, they added a little switch on the hand controller that isn't there in the ones we have. So surgeons kind of miss that when they come up and use our system. So there are a few limitations, Steph. Thank you for the question.
I got one more quick one. So when these are getting sent out, I guess have done their use in the hospital, but they're being sent to a research facility. What governing body or who's making the decision where those go?
Right. Actually, I didn't finish when I was saying that. So the company will donate them based on this grant. If you apply, it's like a grant proposal. You say this, I want to do some research. This is what I want to do. Could you please give me the system? And they'll decide. So the company makes the decision in that case.
Okay.
However, you can also get them from eBay. And some places have. Actually, I think Case Western has one. I think they got theirs from eBay, if I remember correctly. Also, Worcester Polytech got it from eBay. They got the best deal that I know of. They got one for just under 10,000. So 999 all the nines. The other is hospitals. There's sometimes, some hospitals sort of lease them and then the company would take them back, but some hospitals actually bought them. And so the hospitals that bought them, when they're no longer clinically supported, they become essentially just junk. And so a lot of universities were able to get it from their affiliated hospital. So yeah, there's different ways of getting it. But the nice thing is even when the company donates it, Intuitive is well known for having a lot of lawyers and a lot of complicated agreements. But in this particular case, it's a very maybe a 1 or 2 page thing, which is essentially a liability. If your students get hurt using this, don't sue us, kind of a thing. They don't put any restrictions on the data or what you can do with it otherwise. Well, there might be a restriction saying you don't use it on humans, but that's an FDA.
So
yeah.
You talked about these different hardware modules that are part of the dVRK, but the software is also that in that initial block diagram.
Yeah. So what we were able to do, if we go back to that block diagram,
Yeah.
the differences are all encapsulated mostly in the firmware down here, but also in this lowest level hardware interface. So this code is all the same, regardless of what version you use.
All the same, but this is open source stuff. That's not what the company produced, or
Right.
anything.
It's all open source, replicating the system. It's not as good. I mean, if you use a DaVinci, the performance is smoother. You know, they've invested a lot of engineering into the development. So the performance isn't quite as good. And surgeons do comment on that sometimes, but we're working on improving.
But is that where most people are, looking at their innovation is modifying your open source
Actually,
software?
most people are doing things using, it's a little hard to sort of dig in at this level. So some people do, but a lot of them work through ROS and treat the dVRK as essentially like a black box. It's a robot. I can tell it where to go and it'll tell me where it is. Just like you would with a lot of these commercial robots. You have like a UR5 or a KUKA. They treat each arm of the dVRK as a robot that I can tell it what to do through ROS. So yeah, that's how most of it seems. Of course, a lot of my work goes under the covers here. I do a lot of stuff down here or even down here. So I'll talk a little bit about some of this stuff when we get to the force estimation section. Okay, great. Well, thanks for all the good questions. So I'll switch now over to augmented reality. So again, this picture, I've explained what the DaVinci is. Most people focus on this person, the main surgeon. They're the one who's actually, doing the surgery, running the instruments inside the patient. They have the immersive visualization. But there's also this person over here, the assistant. So I'll talk about them in a minute. First, I'll say a little bit about the main surgeon, some of the AR work we did, because this is an obvious case. They're already essentially in an augmented reality type of environment. They have, essentially, it's like a video see-through display because they're seeing directly the endoscope camera here. And so it's not that hard to do AR overlays. So this is something we did back in 2009. This was a demo at the MICI conference in London. And Intuitive Surgical had a booth there, their booth. This was their system, looks like an SI or S or an SI system, would have been SS back then. But if you look at this head, this is not real. I mean, it's kind of a stupid thing to put on a DaVinci because there's no heads inside an abdomen, but it was just showing, the concept of being able to have these AR, 3D objects. This is our low-cost setup. This was the Hopkins booth where we had some Phantom Omni haptic devices and a very simple stereoscopic display. So we were showing that you could, when you're using, so one of the things when you use the system, this is a good view of the hand controllers. There's actually a foot pedal to clutch because similar to when you use a mouse, like if you run out of space, you pick up the mouse, you move it over. You can run out of workspace with these guys. And then what you do is you press a foot pedal. Now you're not driving the robot inside the patient anymore, and you can reposition your hands. And so we took advantage of that. When you clutch, we have a little sort of secret pinch gesture that now you could turn your hands into 3D cursors, and you could interact with the virtual content. So in this case, it was showing that you could take a CT scan, and you could sort of move it around, change the visualization, do slices of it. So these two white balls that are moving, those are being controlled by the user. Actually, that probably wasn't the surgeon, but whoever was using the system was using those two white balls to change the display of this CT scan. So this is something that can be done quite easily with these types of systems. So some of the other stuff we've been working on is using like a head-mounted display, so you don't have to be tethered to this sort of big, I should point it out again, this device here. The sort of nickname for this was the elephant butt. You can kind of slip your head into the elephant butt to do the visualization. So it does keep you kind of constrained, and so the surgeon is sitting there, they're not where the patient is at the bedside. So we've looked at using head-mounted displays. Here, this was HoloLens 1 up here. This was obviously during the pandemic. This is now HoloLens 2, a more recent one, even using hand tracking to control the instruments, which, when the students wanted to do that, I said, yeah, sure, go ahead. I don't think it's going to work. But it actually works okay. I mean, I don't know that you would actually want to do surgery this way, but you can actually do things with the hand tracking was good enough to be able to do things. And this was a more recent one. So in the video, now we're using the Quest 3 because I think that the hand controllers are have a little bit more capability and robustness for doing instrument control than hand tracking. So so that's something actually we're currently working on. So Quest 3 control. That's but anyway, I wanted to get back to yes, I missed this slide. But yeah, so now I want to focus on the other person, the assistant. So I thought I had a slide in here, but let me go back so I can explain a little bit better. Okay. So so this is the assistant surgeon. They're standing at the bedside. They're scrubbed and sterile. And the kind of things they're doing is they're exchanging instruments because these instruments are removable. You can put in scissors, you can put in a needle grasper, different types of devices like that. So they're doing that, but they also have an assistant for it that's not shown here, but another hole into the patient where they can stick in handheld things. And that's, for example, when the surgeon is doing suturing, the needle and thread has to come from somewhere, right? So that this person sticks it in through that assistant port so that the surgeon can use their instruments to grab it. They can also do things like suction, apply irrigation. So this person does actually have a lot that they need to do. However, you can see they don't have the same kind of immersive telepresence as the main surgeon does. They only see the outside of the robot and they get a view of the screen, a 2D view of the endoscope video, which in a way is similar to laparoscopic surgery, if people know what that is, where before there was a robot, people still did these minimally invasive procedures using handheld instruments and the handheld camera, usually held by an assistant surgeon, and then they would look at the screen and they would try to move. But for this person, it's actually can be a lot worse because with a laparoscopic procedure, the camera was positioned so that it was as good as possible in terms of hand-eye coordination for that surgeon. But here, this endoscope camera is positioned for this person's convenience, not necessarily for this one's. So you end up sometimes with some very awkward hand-eye configurations where, once you get your instrument into the field of view, maybe you move right and the instrument moves up. And it can get very confusing, especially for less experienced surgeons. So this is where we thought to introduce some augmented reality assistance by basically giving that person a HoloLens and letting them look inside the body. So, and you can see here, the system was called AR-Assist, augmented reality assistance, I guess. I should say one thing for those of you who haven't done AR. All the AR videos look awful because they're in stereo. So things like the depth, you have to trust me that these are actually inside this phantom. And if you were wearing a HoloLens, they would look inside. I mean, not perfectly. There's still some depth kind of issues of depth perception, which I'm not going to explain because you have one of the world experts right there at your institute about how to properly render depth in AR. But I have to say it would look a lot better in 3D. But the idea was that we let them see, in this case, really mainly just the instruments, and actually the most important thing was the endoscope field of view. This thing over here, because they don't want to operate blind. So even if the endoscope isn't very ideally positioned, they can now more easily get the instrument into the field of view. And you might think that that's pretty easy. Like if I can see, like here, this is the endoscope, I should be able to sort of figure out, and if I'm sticking in something from here, where that field of view is and get my instrument there. But it's actually not the case always, because this endoscope, sometimes they have these 30-degree ones that look off to the side. And depending on how it's rotated, that field of view could be pretty much anywhere in the body. So it can be hard for novice surgeons to even find sometimes they're just sort of hunting around with their instruments, trying to get into the field of view. So this was, I think, one of the biggest benefits that we envisioned out of it. Okay, so how did we do this? You'll have some clues. You can see these markers here. Okay, there we go. So this is sort of conceptually how it works. We're using the computer vision on the HoloLens, using the HoloLens camera to see the markers. And then that tells us where everything is with respect to this world frame that the HoloLens creates. And HoloLens does that. It has this sort of self-localization capability where it can figure out where it is kind of with respect to the walls of the room. And then we have the robot kinematics. So once we know, the thing we're actually trying to find is this, what's called the RCM, or the remote center of motion point. That's actually considered the origin of the robot. And so when we get kinematics, the kinematics tell us like what's going on over here. Well, it also tells us what's going on up here, but for the AR overlay, we care mostly about this. And this would be the little gripper at the end, not just a square. And so the idea is you can see these and then know where they are with respect to the HoloLens world. And I'm showing also calling setup joint kinematics, because in principle, the robot tells you where all of these are with respect to some base. So you can think of it as a registration between the robot space and the world frame that HoloLens creates. At least conceptually, I think it's easier to understand this way. In reality, we did this because the kinematics from the robot, it's a very long mechanical chain. It's not that accurate. So it works better if we just do this and directly locate by observing each of these instruments in endoscope where it is with respect to the HoloLens world. Okay, so if you trust that the HoloLens SLAM works perfectly, you actually only need to do this once, right? Because the robot's big and heavy. It doesn't move once it's attached to the patient. So in principle, if we know where either the robot base is, if you kind of look back at this conceptual drawing, or in the real drawing here, if none of this is moving, because this point doesn't move with respect to the world, we're done. The reality, however, is that this isn't perfect. It drifts over time. And so we do need to be able to continuously update it, but it doesn't have to be, at frame rates. It could be every couple of seconds, we get a new reading, we go, oh, things have drifted a little bit, let's update the AR. So that's an important point. Okay, any questions about kind of how we're doing this?
So,
Okay.
no, if you can go back. So the computer vision is seeing these instruments, which is really something that's attached. You don't really care where that is. You care where the endpoints are down here.
Yeah.
But aren't those instruments moving during?
Yes, but that we know. So if you see it, because we're getting the information also from the robot as to how it's moving. So we're getting all the motion, not just, I probably should.
Okay, so once you know where the robot is with respect to.
Yeah, once you see it, like you can trust, okay, now I know, the robot told me it moved 20 degrees, so I can just update it. I don't have to actually see it. But no, that's a good question. I can make that clear. I sort of implied that we used the robot kinematics mainly for this part to know what's going on here. But yeah, you definitely want to know what's going on up there as well. Yep. Okay, so yeah. So we did an evaluation. This was done actually quite a few years ago. So my student Wong, who graduated right during the pandemic. And I'll focus on, there were two tasks. One, just sticking the instruments into the field of view. And the other one was he had put some like rubber bands inside the patient. And the idea was to grab them using both augmented reality and not augmented reality, in which case you're only looking at a 2D display, which is probably up here somewhere out of the picture. Well, one thing I should also mention is that we did, I don't know if it's shown, it might have been shown here, but we sometimes put the endoscope video down here so that you could actually see things directly. It was a little bit small. They're used to seeing the endoscope video on a large screen, but in this case, it's actually now situated in the correct place. So that was actually quite helpful in this task because you would look directly in and you would see the rubber bands and you would just kind of stick your instrument in, kind of point and shoot, and get close enough to then where you could correct your positioning to actually grab the rubber band. So we did 10 experts, expert surgeons, and 20 novices. In other words, Hopkins students. And we tried 3 different endoscope positions, which that is in terms of the challenge of the hand-eye coordination, where the intent was to make them progressively harder. So you can see the results with the novices. Well, first thing is we didn't actually do a good job making the second one harder than the first one. But what you can see is that there's a lot of statistically significant improvement for the AR case, which is in blue in terms of this is the time to do the task compared to no AR. So that looks really great. Now, this is a very common thing with any technology, not just AR. You take some new thing to the expert surgeons and you don't really see much benefit because by definition, they're experts. They've learned to adapt to the way things work now. And so you give them something new, sometimes the best you can hope for is that at least it's not statistically significantly worse, which is the case. You can see that there's no statistical significance in any of the data with the experts. It actually, the AR seemed to make them a little bit worse in the easy cases and maybe helped a little bit in the harder case. However, the feedback we got from these experts was that, okay, yeah, this is not that helpful to me, but I could see this being really helpful to my trainees, as they come up to proficiency. So basically as training and as sort of a bridging between when they first start practice to when they become proficient. So that's what we're really focusing on now, is being able to use this to help with that sort of early learning curve. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about some of the limitations, which has driven some of the subsequent work on this. So I should do a time check.
About 30 minutes.
Good. All right. So some of the limitations are we had to attach markers. We actually attached them down by the RCM point, so you could also attach them by the instrument. That's a real big problem because they're hard to sterilize. They can be disruptive to the clinical workflow. Another is that this is showing here the endoscope view. It's just a 2D view. All of this, the instruments, of course, we had nice CAD models. We did 3D renderings of all of that, but the anatomy was just 2D. So that led in 2 different approaches. I'm going to sort of take a little detour first and talk about this one, 3D visualization of anatomy, and then on markerless tracking, which is really more in line towards what we want to. We want to actually translate this now to clinical use. Okay, so this is a RAMIS, which my student came up with. It stands for Augmented Reality Assistance for Minimally Invasive Surgery. And the idea is that you can actually do this 3D, sort of essentially like X-ray vision, so that the person, wearing the HoloLens, so this is the view taken through the HoloLens, you can actually see what's going on inside the body in 3D. Now, this was really challenging to do. We look at the block diagram that we did. This was done in 2018 or 2019, I think. So no neural networks here. But the idea is that you get this stereo video, and then it was using conventional computer vision to come up with a disparity map and then generate a 3D point cloud. And then this is where really a lot of the hard work was by my student, was doing all of this fast enough so that first of all, generating the point cloud and then streaming it over Wi-Fi and rendering it on, in this case, HoloLens 1 fast enough. It was a real challenge, and it really did suck up a lot of resources on HoloLens 1. So it was quite good, but it still has some limitations. And one is that, what we're doing here is we've got an endoscope in one position, and then we've got the person with the HoloLens looking at it from a different view. And so you've got this sort of discrepancy. And if you're close enough, like if the endoscope's here and you're looking at it here, that's not too bad. But if the endoscope's here and you're looking this way, you don't really see anything reasonable. So that led to one more project called FlexiVision, where the idea was, since again, now we know where the HoloLens is with respect to the endoscope field of view. So in this case, we took advantage of the fact that we had a visiting student from Chinese University of Hong Kong who had developed this little sort of snake-like endoscope, and could set it up so that this endoscope would reposition itself as the HoloLens, as the surgeon would be walking around, so that the view you had was always from the right perspective. So that's interesting. It's more of an academic thing right now because there is no 3D sort of flexible endoscope on a Da Vinci these days, but I think it's an interesting, maybe for laparoscopic procedures, it's be an interesting way to do it. Okay, so let me get to markerless tracking. Initially we had markers attached everywhere, and as I explained, that's not something we really want in the long term. So we've done some work. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to make sure we have time for some of the later stuff. But we did some work using computer vision, and here we spent actually a lot of time trying to use deep learning to go straight from images to 60 poses, and it didn't work. I don't feel like that stuff was, at least as of about a year ago, robust enough. So we did a pipeline where we used machine learning for things it's good at, like using YOLO to find where is the head of the housing of the instrument, and then SAM2 to segment the instrument shaft. And sort of a combination of some machine learning and some conventional computer vision, identifying features, doing PNP, coming up with the shaft line, doing this sort of optimization between the PNP from features on the housing, and then the line detected by segmenting the shaft. We were able to get reasonable results on that. This is just showing some of the work. Now here, going back to the question I was asked earlier, this is one limitation of using a dVRK. The instruments of newer generation systems, those housings that we're relying on, if I go back, these are not instruments that you can use with a dVRK. This is actually a robot similar to the Da Vinci in China, in Hong Kong, and the Vinci Xi, the latest generation systems, look like this. So we can't do that with the dVRK because our instruments look different. So that is definitely one place where you can't use a dVRK for that aspect of research. Okay, so we also did something where for the assistant port, since that one is part of the port that the assistant uses, we worked on a computer vision for tracking that as well, so that we could show them a dashed line as to if you stick your instrument in, this is where it's going to show up. We decided it was easier to track the trocar because there's only one of those. The trocar is this thing, the part that sticks into the patient, rather than the handheld instrument, because there could be any number of handheld instruments and we don't know in advance what they look like. So that's the, let's move on. Okay, so about how do you clinically translate this to the OR? So this is where we can take advantage of these read-only interfaces. Because if I do want to use this clinically, I can't do it on the dVRK. And so fortunately, even the thing I showed you with the CT scan of a skull or of a head inside the Da Vinci, that was done, in fact, this is the picture that I had with that video. That was done using the read-only API and just stealing, because the endoscope video is just a cable, you can easily intercept that. So by getting the robot arm positions, in the case of that, it was just this, but of course, in what I'm doing, I primarily need these positions here. You can actually read those, generate your AR overlays, capture the endoscope video, do the overlay, and then stick it out onto the system display. So fortunately, that's an option for being able to do the AR. And so we did some in vivo experiments with a pig in Hong Kong last month. And this is actually Russ Taylor. For those of you who haven't met him, he was there as well. That's me. This was the surgeon doing the procedure. That's actually another surgeon who did some parts of it as well. We were using a system called the Cornerstone Centier, which is similar to the Da Vinci, and the HoloLens 2. This here was just remote streaming for people to see the HoloLens view. It was somewhat delayed, but at least gave you an indication of what was happening. And then, so the HoloLens is here. Now, this is the endoscope monitor that they could also look at, that they would normally look at as the assistant. So this person is acting as the assistant surgeon. Okay, so we did 3 different tasks. One was inserting a handheld instrument, and very simple, just stick it in until you touch there's one robotic instrument in there, just stick it in until you touch. And we had a couple of different conditions with between no AR as a baseline, kind of full augmented reality, and including the dashed line showing you the insertion path, and then AR without that dashed line. This video that I got last night from my student is that case, because I don't see the dashed line for the control card. But you can see he does the task pretty quickly because he's a very experienced surgeon. Second one we did was have him insert the robotic instrument to a second robotic instrument to touch the one that was already in there. And we had 3 conditions. Again, the baseline, we had just the AR plus the physical monitor. This is the monitor here. And then we had one where we had AR only. We didn't let them see the physical monitor. We also took away, there was a virtual monitor that was in the seat. Maybe that will probably be on the next one. We didn't let them see basically any endoscope video, so they were using only the AR overlays to try to touch the 2 instruments. And so what you can see in this video, actually, let me go to the next slide. It's not moving as much. So this is just screenshots. This is from the video I was just showing you. So you can see that using the AR overlays, he's got it looks pretty good. Like this tip is touching that tip. He wasn't able, we didn't let, in that configuration, we didn't let him see this. Turned out he did worked out pretty well. You can see this is the, essentially the error of the AR overlay. But they didn't always work that well. This was another case where we had a much larger discrepancy in the overlay. So, okay, so interesting. We also did another task with removing gauze using the handheld instrument. And in here you can see this is a case where we only had him look at the virtual monitor and not, you can see the real monitors turned away so he can't see it, just to see if you could do it effectively with that. We had a case also where he could use both. And even in the case where he could use both, he tended to look more at the virtual monitor because he was able to position that in a convenient location. As you can see this one, even if it's turned to face him, it's really not, he has to turn his head to look at that. So we found that even in this condition, he spent most of the time looking at the virtual monitor and less at the physical monitor. Okay, move on. There we go. Kind of summary, we got a lot of data. We still haven't analyzed it all. One thing I should have said probably a few minutes ago. We did all this work on markerless tracking, but then we sort of chickened out. We were like, well, we really want this to work. The main objective of this experiment was just to test the workflow. Does the surgeon think this would be useful? And we didn't want, due to lighting conditions or some other problems, to have nothing working when we've got, the pig on the table and the surgeon there. So we put a bunch of markers on. But when the procedure was done, we took the markers off, and this is my student Nick, and we collected wearing the HoloLens so that we could collect the data to test out the markerless tracking under these really more realistic conditions with, in vivo, with a draped robot. Because you can see why we're looking at the instruments. That's really the only thing that isn't covered by a drape. So we're hoping to be able to test out, at least offline, how well the markerless tracking works. Because really, I don't feel this is feasible for a clinical procedure, all markers on that. So some of the observations, anecdotally, because we haven't crunched all the data yet, is that it did seem the virtual monitor was good enough. The surgeon liked it. They did comment that the display quality was lower than the physical monitor, not surprisingly, but I think due to its convenience, it was still useful. That dashed line for the assistant port, it didn't really seem to be that necessary, which is nice. One less thing you have to make sure it works. But of course, since he was an expert surgeon, there didn't seem to be any real difference in how well he could do the tasks with or without AR. Okay, so that was all the AR stuff. I guess if there's any questions on the AR stuff, I've got a little bit of time left for the talking about some force estimation. Yeah, Tara.
So Peter, can you do that find the accuracy that you're using AR for?
Yeah, we're planning to, that's one of the, yeah, so one of the, oh wait, or, really? Okay, yeah, so we have the endoscope video, and it's a stereo endoscope, actually, this is just showing one of the images, and we have the calibration parameters for the endoscope. So one of the things we can do is we can actually measure this, which would show us really kind of the error we care about, which is the surgeon thinks it's perfect, but what is it really? It covers all kinds of sources of error in AR, like the perception, the display calibration on the HoloLens, registration, tracking errors. They're all kind of bundled into that sort of end-to-end error. And you can see it's probably a couple centimeters. Well, in my opinion, it probably is, because mainly they're using the display, or a big use of it is to get the instrument into the field of view. And the field of view, it looks big, but they're actually zoomed in very often, so maybe just a couple centimeters. When we asked the surgeon, they said they wanted about a centimeter of accuracy. So we don't have that. Now, of course, we don't care as much how accurate the markers are, because we're not planning to use them, but our markerless tracking, when we compared it to the marker-based, was similar. So I don't expect it would be much better markerless. Now, what we are doing, this is about the CIS2 class. There's a computer integrated surgery class, which in the spring is a project course at Hopkins. I have a team of 3 students working on not just tracking from the outside, but also tracking from the inside, right? So, because you can see the outside from the HoloLens, but on the inside, the endoscope can see the instruments. So the idea is that we can close the loop using both the endoscope video, and that would help really with the endpoint accuracy, because it's very easy to get large errors when you're tracking out here because of the sort of angulation error. So yeah, we're hoping that we can improve that significantly. Hopefully my team of students.
It's also similar to Da Vinci.
What's similar to Da Vinci? That robot? Oh yeah. I mean, it's, we actually can use the same algorithms for finding this on an XI instrument as this. This is really, there's some lawsuits going on between the company and this Chinese company.
Yeah, bring it to the United States.
Pardon?
Can you bring it to the United States?
No. He's not bringing any of these systems to the US. So yeah, I asked him, because I said it's a pain in the neck for us to fly to Hong Kong to test this. So he offered me to go to London to have one in London. It's at least closer. But anyway, but that was a good question. All right. So move on. Force estimation. Okay. Right. So one of the big thing people complain about with the Da Vinci, I'm talking about even about the clinical system, is that surgeons lost the sense of touch. Right. So first, when surgeons do open surgery, they're sticking their hands in, they can feel things really well. But even with laparoscopic, where they have these handheld instruments and they're going in and grabbing things, they don't get the same sensation as using their bare hands or gloved hands, but they do get at least some sense of the amount of force, a pretty good sense actually of the amount of force they're applying. So now the DV5, the latest generation of Da Vinci, has introduced force sensing for some instruments. So on the one hand, I'm glad I published most of my papers before that came out on force estimation. But the other thing is that even, what they had to do here is they actually added strain gauges to their instruments, which, you can imagine adds a little bit to the cost of the instrument, but it actually more than doubles the cost. And the reason is that because of the extra, strain gauges that are in there, the instruments aren't as reusable. So these instruments that the company makes, that's the big moneymaker for them. They're good typically for 10 uses. There's a little chip in it that counts kind of its life, and you have to replace it after 10 uses. With the force sensing sensors in there, it's only 5. So you're basically paying a lot more for that. So I think there's still some value in looking at, can you estimate forces from data you already have? And in the case of the Da Vinci, the data you already have, and you can measure the motor currents. You'll also know the positions and velocities of the arms. And sort of given now that we're getting into a little robotics here. I don't know if people have robotics. Who does robotics here? But essentially, if you look at the dynamics equations of a robot, Q dot, Q double dot, that's just the position, velocity, and acceleration of the robot joints. And so it basically says that tau, it's the torque. It basically says that the force is some combination of these terms, based on the amount of torque needed to move the robot at the current position velocity, and this is gravity, the effect of gravity, and then any sort of friction, stuff like that, but then also the external torque, right? We care about the external torque, estimating that. So in principle, I measure this. If I can come up with a way of figuring out what this is, I just subtract the two of those, gives me this, and then I can figure out the force. That's the basic approach that you can take here. So we actually started out thinking, well, this is actually kind of hard to model. So we looked at using a neural network for that. And it's quite easy to at least get the data for the neural network. All you have to do is move the robot around in free space and collect data of the actual torque, and then you feed in the positions and velocities, and then the neural network, and then you train the neural network to predict a torque that matches the actual torque in free space. So that's the basic idea. Then once you have that, now I've got a trained neural network. Given the positions and velocities of the joints, it predicts a torque that would be due needed to move the robot in free space. Now I take the measured torque, I subtract them. Whatever's left over should be the torque due to the environment. And based on that, there's a Jacobian inverse transpose you have to apply, and get an estimate of the external force. And if you look at some of the plots, it can work pretty well. These, of course, are some of the best results. For those of you people who work with neural networks, they work great, except when they don't. So sometimes it wasn't that good. So now there's also some practical considerations when you do neural networks or any kind of dynamics identification, which is that doing stuff in free space, you've got to also consider when it's being used in the patient, it's going through these trocars, these ports that go into the body. And so there's some side forces applied there. So we did some work also to try to account for those forces. And however, there it's not feasible to tell a surgeon, okay, you've docked the robot to the patient, you stick your instrument in, can you collect an hour of training data for me, and then I'll run my neural network training for another hour, and then you can do surgery with force estimation. So we looked at some more efficient ways of doing that. I'll just show one quickly here, which is, this is work done by a visiting Ph.D. student, Mural, who's actually now a postdoc with Axel Krieger, and a faculty member at Marmara University in Turkey. And so what they did here is we actually took advantage of the fact that we have all these dVRKs around the world, and we got data from I think 5 or 6 different places, like from London, from Hungary, from Italy, from Worcester Polytech in the US. And then we looked at how, like, if you trained a network on data from one, how well did it transfer to another robot? Did you have to do, and also if you changed instruments, if you changed the mounting angle. So there's a lot of stuff we did. And basically, I think I took the plot out, or the table out, because it's just a whole lot of numbers. But the basic thing that we found is that if you had a network trained with a lot of free space data of one robot, one instrument, one mounting angle, and then you got a little bit of data in a different configuration, you could do transfer learning, right? Where you're just adapting now this pre-trained network. And it adapted and worked fairly well with that new robot or new configuration or new instrument. So that was the basic outcome there. The SI system, this is the SI compared to the first generation. It's a lot harder to do this because it has heavier joints and higher friction. So we've been working on trying to do to get decent force estimation here, because our initial attempt taking the methods that we used here and trying them here, the error was like 3 times larger. It was awful. So, so we've been working on doing actually more of a conventional dynamics approach, where we run these, excitation trajectories, collect a bunch of data, do an optimization, and come up with actual model based. So this is now model based rather than a neural network. And we get pretty good results, especially for the first 3 joints, which are the main ones. It's harder to get these joints because you've got signal to noise ratio problem. The torques needed for these small instruments, the risks of the instruments is quite low. And so it actually doesn't really matter that much. You can do most of your force estimation using just forces measured by these 3 joints. Okay, one thing we did find also is that the static friction is huge. I mean, this is measuring the friction band. So, it's more than it's a couple Newton meters in case of the rotary joints, like a Newton or 2 in case of a translation joint. So that's an issue. That's still something we're trying to solve. One of the things we're looking at is even using a dithering approach. I have a paper coming up on that at ISMR. The idea being that you've got this static friction, so you have the case where the motor and encoder could be saying, yeah, hey, I'm moving, but in reality, nothing's happening. And conversely, if you apply a force out here to the friction, you measure nothing here until you break the static friction. So by using this dithering, where you're constantly sort of doing a low amplitude oscillation down here, this is a technique that dates back probably at least 50 years, if not more. You can try to essentially minimize the effect of that friction band. So, all right, so last thing, yeah, I'll take about 2-3 minutes on this. Because I talked only about force estimation. Force estimation isn't that useful unless you have some way of displaying it, but you could do graphically. But we also wanted to look at doing bilateral teleoperation, which means that, so normally in a Da Vinci, it's unilateral. You're moving the input device and it's sending positions to the robot in the body. Bilateral means that forces from the robot measured by the robot are coming back and you get haptic feedback on the input device. And so here we did find that even having decent force estimates, the haptics was just awful when we first tried it. And so we really had to dig into the low-level control, make some improvements in low-level control, implement this 4-channel architecture, which is kind of the standard for bilateral teleoperation. I don't want to think there's trying to get anything in details. But what's interesting is this experimental evaluation, where we took a phantom and we had 4 different ports or places to palpate. And under one of them, there was a stiffer object. And so he asked, could you identify which one of the 4 was the stiffest one? So guessing would be about 25%. And we had different conditions. Hands, where we said, here's the phantom, use your fingers, palpate. Not surprisingly, we have 12 subjects, 100% figured out which one was stiffer using their hand. Interestingly, we thought, well, what if we just take the Da Vinci instrument and you hold it in your hand and you poke with it? So it's like poking with a stick. Thought we might get 100%, but actually we dropped a little, got about 95% accuracy. You look at next to unilateral. This is without any force feedback, where you're just judging it based on visually how things change. Interestingly, that was about 50%. This is just different scaling factors between the motion of the hand versus the motion of the instrument. It didn't really matter that much for this, so the results were about the same. But basically, we got about 50% accuracy, so twice as good as guessing. So it's actually not that bad. And then this is showing with the dynamics estimation and without, where we don't compensate for the dynamics due to motion of the robot. And they were both about 85 to 90%. Oh, sorry, 85%. And then let me do this one first, and then I want to come back to this. With a force sensor, what we did is we had a force sensor underneath it, and we used that as feedback rather than this estimated force that we did. So this should be more accurate. And in fact, the performance was a little better. So if you look kind of in order, with bare hands, 100%, Laparoscopic kind of setup, 95%. Very good force sensing, 90%. Not as good force sensing, about 85%. No force sensing, about 50%, 55%. Now, what you may ask is, why are these two the same? Why am I bothering with all this dynamics estimation if not including it at all gives you the same performance? And the reason is that in this task, where you're just palpating, you're not really moving very fast, right? The robot's moving really slow, so the dynamics is negligible. Where dynamics matters is when you're moving fast, because if you don't compensate for it, you get this heavy feel while you're trying to move the robot, just even in free space. So we're now playing around with some things, doing multilateral teleoperation, where we can use a setup between an expert and a novice and have them share control of the same instrument, which is a novel thing. I mean, the Da Vinci supports, the commercial product supports dual console, but it's only where one surgeon controls one set of instruments, the other surgeon controls a different set, and they can, of course, swap instruments. Here we've got them controlling the same instrument. So it's a little bit more like people who learn how to drive. You've got the sort of the steering wheel that the instructor has and the steering wheel that you have, or the brakes that you both have. So that's something we're looking at, which it's a bit of a challenge because there's no way to make sure that that you can really share the same haptic feedback between two users. So I think here the next step we need to do is really look at some visual overlays. Okay, so that's it. I want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Additionally, I know it's great we got some before, but essentially, you know, what I really tried to get across today is that there is this thing called the Vinci Research Kit, which is a shared community infrastructure, and it's currently available at more than 40 institutions. And I didn't show this last one; I cut that out. But there's just some of the research examples in my lab. But of course, people use it for many other things, including a lot of research now, especially by some of my colleagues, Axel Krieger, Matthias and Barat, on autonomous surgery, autonomous surgery, things like that. So thanks. I'll take questions.
All right, so thank you so much for this great presentation. I think we still have some time for questions. I know there's some people online. I don't know if we want to start here while we wait for those questions online. Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are the bread and butter surgical procedures that the Da Vinci is being used for?
Yep, great question. Well, it's abdominal stuff mostly. Interestingly, the Da Vinci, they initially created it when the company was formed in the mid-90s. Their goal was minimally invasive cardiac surgery. If that was all they tried to do, they would have been out of business about 15 or 20 years ago. But what happened is that, because the problem with cardiac, they just didn't provide enough capability to really help there. But they got lucky in that one of the surgeons like, oh, let me see if I can take out a prostate with this thing. And it worked really well for prostate. And so that's really what created the sort of the market or the opportunity for that. And then once they had prostate, they started moving to other procedures. You can do a cholecystectomy, which is removing of gallbladder, although that's pretty easy to do laparoscopically. So I actually don't know how widely adopted it is. Prostate is another story. I mean, it's a couple of years ago, in the US at least, if you had your prostate taken out, it was like 90% chance it was done by a Da Vinci. So maybe it's even 95% now. It's really, really taken over that market. It's used for kidney, especially partial nephrectomies, where you take out just the cancerous part of the kidney. It's moved also into a lot of gynecological procedures, although again, it's not anywhere near prostate. I think the adoption is maybe 50-60% compared to, say, laparoscopic or other types of procedures. But yeah, those are some of the main uses. But people use it all over the place. There are people who do throat surgery, tongue surgery with it. Some who do cardiac surgery. Probably other stuff I don't even know about. Actually, I know one place in Texas is doing even a lumpectomy, like a breast surgery. They stick it through, a small incision and take cancer out inside the breast.
sorry, just to follow up to that. And so is the main advantage, I can see with the prostate, probably the main advantage was some sort of accuracy that led to a lower post-operative complication rate. Is that primarily what it is? It faster? Is it
No,
more accurate? What is the main benefit?
Yeah, so the benefit of the Da Vinci really is that it allows pretty much any surgeon to do a good minimally invasive procedure. Because before the Da Vinci, people did laparoscopic, prostate removal, but it was really hard to do. But you didn't have the dexterity, they call it sort of chopstick surgery, using these straight shaft instruments. You've got a little pistol grip or some other grip here, and you're basically just opening and closing something. And the visualization wasn't as good. They used a mono, a single channel endoscope. And so it was really hard. So you had to be a really expert surgeon to do a good job. Whereas now with the Da Vinci, it's really makes it easier. They've got much better visualization. They've got stereo. They've got dexterity now, this wrist inside the body. And so, yeah, it's really, I think, primarily the visualization and the dexterity that makes it much more like open surgery, and therefore really anybody can do it. Yeah.
Kind of to follow up on that, is it that surgeons who use the Da Vinci and they don't do laparoscopic, or are there surgeons that would be going back and forth under different conditions where, okay, I'm doing this kind of surgery, I'll do this laparoscopic?
Yeah, that's tough for me to answer in general, but at least some of the surgeons I know, especially like I do quite a bit of work with a gynecologic surgeon, and she'll tend to do most of her cases still laparoscopically, but for some of the difficult cases, she'll use the robot. So, and I know with Robotic, I didn't talk about that, could be a whole other talk someday, right? With Robotic, there were some sites that said this system is really indispensable for these really difficult surgeries, whereas the easier surgeries, I could just do it faster myself without the robot. So there were some sites who only use the robot for the hard cases. So I imagine that probably is the case with the Da Vinci, and it certainly is the case with the one gynecologic surgeon I work with. On the prostate side, they're all using Da Vinci. Well, there's one surgeon at Hopkins who refuses to use the Da Vinci as all, laparoscopically. Yeah.
Isn't it a safety measure to make sure that if the surgeon doesn't have that kind of expertise and he may cut something unintentionally, is there any safety to stop them?
Yeah.
Like, a standard car that has a brake system or whatever. And also, when the surgeon is left-handed or right-handed. So if this kind of stuff is considered in this kind of...
Yeah. So left-handed versus right-handed isn't a problem because it's a symmetric system. You can decide to use, dominantly your left hand or your right hand. There's no bias in the system either way that I'm aware of. But the other question you ask is harder to answer. The Da Vinci system itself, it's really just telesurgery. You move your hand, the instrument moves. So the safety is really in the training that they do. There's a training program they have. There's a lot of stuff I didn't mention. They have a simulator that's pretty nice, because the thing about a system like this is you can use the same physical console, and instead of connecting to a real robot and a real patient, you can connect to a simulated environment, and you can do a lot of practice that way in this simulation. So they have that. So there's of course a lot of lawsuits out there when surgeries have gone bad, and a lot of time it comes down to, was the training sufficient? Did the company provide the good training resources? And there's also the medical societies are looking at that as well. But I think, yes, safety is important. And a lot of the research that people do is seeing if there's ways you can improve the safety. I didn't really, well, in a way, I guess the augmented reality thing I'm talking about was intended to improve safety. Because if you're the assistant surgeon and you're sticking instruments in to try to get into the field of view, and you don't really know exactly where you should go, you could poke something that's out of the field of view, some other organ, and cause damage, and that does happen. So I think the AR could help with safety, There's people also looking at more of a perception using computer vision to try to detect certain critical things and provide at least a warning to the surgeon that, hey, be careful, you're close to the whatever artery or something. But it's yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think more is needed than what's currently available.
All right, so
Maybe one.
maybe we can do that
Yeah, I get it,
offline. We kind of run out of time, but I think you'll be available for a few
Yeah,
minutes, so
I'll be
we
here.
can probably do it outside. So
All right.
let's just thank again our today's speaker,